You need to be optimistic and realistic at the same time. By being optimistic, you can be positive. Hey, I think we can get through this. The weather's going to clear at some point. But also realistic. It's scary during the earthquake. It's scary during the avalanches. We don't know how we're going to get off Mount Everest after the deadliest day ever and the route has been destroyed. So it's optimistic and realistic at the same time. It's not all just rah, 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 because during the earthquake, if our leader had said, everything's fine, what are you nervous about? Everything's wonderful, this is going to be a great day, I might have thought she was not in touch with reality. I might have questioned her judgment and not wanted to follow her. Instead, she was realistic but optimistic. She's like, I know it's scary, but we got a really good team. We made it through the first avalanche. We're more likely to survive the second one. I thought, well, she's true. We got a few things working for us here. So by being realistic and optimistic at the same time, it sets a pattern that we're not going to hide from the dangers. We're not going to deny the problems and the uncertainties, but we are going to figure that we can solve this because we have smart team members, dedicated team members. We're going to figure this problem out.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nick Carrier's Best You podcast. I'm super stoked today to have back the one and only Jim Davidson. Jim, I just want to start off by saying thanks so much for spending the time again with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be back with you and your listeners.
Yeah, no doubt. So I had you the first time on to talk about your first book, The Ledge, which was absolutely awesome. And now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the Next Everest, surviving the mountain's deadliest day and finding the resilience to climb again. And as I was kind of letting you know beforehand, I finished it about a week ago, and it's such an awesome story. And it's almost kind of like, to me, it was almost split into like three different chunks, kind of the 2015, that kind of the gap in between, and then 2017 going back to hiking. It was unbelievable, the kind of the emotional roller coaster that you're taking on as a reader almost through your experience. But so essentially, to kind of give a super brief recap, in 2015 you were climbing Everest, and I briefly mentioned The Ledge in the intro there. 23 years earlier, you were climbing Mount Rainier when tragedy struck, and you were hiking with your partner, Mike Price, and you guys fell through a crevasse, and long story short, he passed away. You ended up surviving. And as you talk about when hiking Mount Everest, there's always the opportunity or the uncertainty or the potential of a crevasse popping up that you don't see and having the potential to fall through. And there's kind of a lot of uncertainties that have the ability to pop up out of nowhere. So what gives you kind of the courage and the ability to keep moving and keep doing things like this when there is so much uncertainty involved?
Well, you're right. I mean, there's lots of uncertainties in mountaineering. The weather, your skills, your partner, crevasses, cracks on the glacier, avalanches. There's all those uncertainties. But you know what? If I stayed home and stayed on the couch to be safe, there'd be other uncertainties. My health, my longevity, and is my brain turning to mush by watching TV 18 hours a day? Those are risk and uncertainties as well. So I decided to try and instead take on the sort of the active role of going out there and choosing what I want to try and go after, accept those uncertainties, and try and train myself and my team as best I can. Because it's like, if I'm going to face uncertainty, I might as well do it doing something that gives me pleasure and the opportunity to grow, rather than sitting on the couch and wondering how long I'm going to live and what health concern might strike me.
I think that's great. What do you say then to people who? What about the people who are unwilling to go into something challenging, and kind of their reasoning is because there's so much uncertainty? You know, it could be starting a new job, right? Because there is risk in starting a new job, but there's risk in staying at the old job. Maybe you don't learn new things. Maybe you don't grow as a professional. Like, what's kind of the conversation look like to somebody when the excuse or the thing that is holding them back is the level of uncertainty of a challenge or of something new?
Yeah, I think we all recognize those uncertainties, whether we take the job or not, whether we climb the mountain or not. And so instead, I try and find that spark in them and say, well, what is it that would really get you excited? You know, like if we could put those uncertainties aside, what would really get you excited? Maybe it's learning how to play guitar. Maybe it's running a marathon or getting their degree. If that's what gets you excited, see, the reward is so big and the potential for growth is so big towards that exciting thing that now suddenly the uncertainties are worth taking on. So I think you have to look inside yourself yourself and maybe help others, find that spark of passion that says, you know what, I know there's uncertainty. I know it's going to take time and money and effort, but darn it, I want that thing. And that's different for everybody. I mean, I'm motivated by mountains, but I'm not motivated by music per se. You could not make me stay in a room for 40 hours a week and practice guitar because I'm just not driven by that. I'd probably wander off after about 3 hours and not come back. But somebody else, they'd stay there 60 hours a week because they're so motivated. So find that thing that gets you pumped up, that draws you towards it, and that'll make taking on the uncertainties and the risk manageable and valuable.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we have to sit down and evaluate and realize that it is worth our time. Like sometimes we don't know it would be worth our time going into an uncertainty, I feel like, unless we take a step back and realize the potential positive possibilities that could come from different things.
Absolutely. And the beauty of picking something that comes from passion is if you reach that objective, like say I'm into mountaineering and I want to climb Everest. If I'd gotten into mountaineering and spent 30 years being a mountaineer and on summit day I had a stomach ache and I couldn't summit Everest, you know what? I spent the last 30 years doing what I wanted, turning myself into a better climber, learning along the way, hanging out with similar-minded people who are going to lift me up and make me better. Hopefully I can help them. And so even though I didn't summit, I still got almost all the rewards. And so conversely, if I don't want to be a musician, if you'd made me stay in a room for 30 years and practice guitar and I didn't make it to Carnegie Hall, I might be really bummed out. I'm like, oh man, I spent 30 years doing the wrong thing and I didn't get the golden prize at the end. But by picking what drives you from passion, you're going to get everything you want along the way, and maybe there's a cherry on top of your sundae at the end that Carnegie Hall or the summit of Everest awaits you.
Yeah, and I think that you said something that you touched on a little bit in your book and something that I have heard and thought about before in regards to like set a goal that is going to require you to become somebody by achieving it. So, you like set a goal to achieve a certain amount of money, not because you want to achieve a certain amount of money necessarily, but because you're going to have to learn so much, you're going to have to experience so much, you're going to have to, go through a lot of challenge in order to able to achieve that goal. But, at the end of the day, like if there are certain things that are out of your control that right at the end stop you from being able to achieve that ultimate thing, or you fall just a little bit short, you still became the person along the way and along the journey.
Absolutely. You've met great people. You've been inspired. Hopefully you've uplifted and inspired some other people, yourself along the way. And, I think the goal also needs to be big enough to make you nervous. So let's say you're a walker and you can walk 3 miles. If you say, I want to see if I can walk 3.1 miles. Well, that's nice to have a goal, but I don't think that's really going to improve you a whole lot. Maybe instead you should say, I wonder if I can walk 10 miles or 20, or maybe even run a marathon. And if it makes you really scared and nervous, now you're on to something, because your body and mind and spirit know, I want to do that thing and I think I can do that thing, but I'm not really sure. Exactly. That's what's going to make you do more and become more than you've ever done before.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm not going to go too much into this personal story, but just real quick, I just actually kind of went through a personal goal that I set for myself. I wanted to decrease my 1 mile run time from 5 minutes and 5 seconds to 4 minutes and 45 seconds. And I did 10 weeks of very specific training for that. And on race day, I ran 4:46 and not 4:45. And, I fell a second short of the goal, which obviously I would have loved to get down to. But ultimately, I wasn't super upset and super bummed, because I still became the person that I wanted to become, and I learned the things that I wanted to learn, and I interacted with the people and had so much growth through it that the 440 coming up a second short didn't really affect how I reevaluated how the whole thing went.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree completely, because you learned all that stuff, you did all that work, and now your threshold is that much higher. So next year, if you take 5 seconds off that goal, you'll probably beat it, because you've advanced so much on the fronts of mental and physical and your belief system that who knows what the next goal might be. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll appreciate it. One of the things that I feel like a lot of people holds maybe a lot of people back is they think about the negative possibilities that could come from doing something challenging rather than the positive possibilities. And so, for you, there's a lot of risk involved, obviously, in climbing Mount Everest. You think about, what if I never see my family again? When you're hiking, you think, what if I fall, and all these things. And you talk about in your book how you have to try to not give too much energy and attention to all those negative possibilities and keep your sights more focused on the positive and keeping moving up rather than looking behind you. So how do you kind of tactically do that? How do you not give space to those negative thoughts and negative possibilities?
Well, as I shared in my book, The Next Everest, I learned it a lot working with my dad. He had an industrial painting business along with my uncles. And we did crazy jobs like climbing huge ladders to go up church steeples and climbing electrical towers and, sandblasting cranes and crazy things like that. And sometimes when I would kind of stall out, I was a teenager, I'd go like, I'm kind of afraid to go up this ladder, but I don't want to tell my dad. But, the look in my eyes, I'm sure told him how afraid I was. And he would just say little things to encourage me along. And the one I shared in the book was I was scared to climb this triple ladder that sticks up 75 feet up against this church steeple. And he said, focus on the climb, not the drop. And that was really key for me. And I realized when I was climbing Everest, literally 40 years later, I realized that means you're aware of the drop, the downsides, the negative things that could happen, but you don't stare at them the whole time. Instead, you focus on how you climb. You climb a ladder by looking at the rungs, not the space between the rungs, not the area outside the rungs, not the ground 70 feet below. You focus on the rungs. And it's like when you ride a bike. If you're riding down the sidewalk, you look towards the open space. I think football players say run for daylight is another way, right? There's people and things and dangers all around you. But when you're on the sidewalk, you don't stare at the tree because you'll probably hit the tree. You're aware of the tree, and then you just focus on riding safely down the sidewalk. And so it doesn't deny the existence of the risk. It recognizes them, but it focuses on the solution to get you past those dangers to where you want to go.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think that kind of takes me a little bit into where I want to go next in regard to, where did I write it down here? So you talked about during the first climb when the earthquakes were happening and things of that nature, how you want to be positive, or it was probably during both like 15 and 17. You talk about the balance of staying positive versus again, kind of the potential negative things that can happen, or the concern. That's what it was. The kind of the balance of positivity and showing concern for the difficulty of the challenge. And that's what you kind of talk a little bit about in exchanging messages with your family and exchanging messages with some of your friends. Is like, I want to be positive, but not overly positive where I'm deceiving them, but I don't want to show too much concern to make them scared. So how do you kind of find the balance in your own head of positivity versus showing legitimate concern?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I've thought about that a lot because I've been an expedition leader taking college students on expeditions around the world. I've been a team member following an expedition leader like I was on 2015 on Everest and 2017 on Everest. And I think what it boils down to is this. You need to be optimistic and realistic at the same time. And so that by being optimistic, you can be positive. Hey, I think we can get through this. The weather's going to clear at some point, but also realistic. It's scary during the earthquake. It's scary during the avalanches. We don't know how we're going to get off Mount Everest after the deadliest day ever and the route has been destroyed. So it's optimistic and realistic at the same time. It's not all just rah, 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 because during the earthquake, if our leader had said, everything's fine, what are you nervous about? Everything's wonderful. This is going to be a great day. I might have thought she was not in touch with reality. I might have questioned her judgment and not wanted to follow her. Instead, she was realistic but optimistic. She was like, I know it's scary, but we got a really good team, and we made it through the first avalanche. We're more likely to survive the second one. I thought, well, she's true. We got a few things working for us here. So by being realistic and optimistic at the same time, it sets a pattern that we're not going to hide from the dangers. We're not going to deny the problems and the uncertainties, but we are going to figure that we can solve this because we have smart team members, dedicated team members. We're going to figure this problem out.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to when you're both optimistic and realistic, it's discussing the actual facts that are going on, because that's what allows the people who are around you, who are seeing your optimism and realism, actually believe you. Because sometimes if someone is just overly optimistic and the situation is you shouldn't just be overly optimistic, then they're not going to believe you, and they're like, all right, this guy's just full of crap. He's just an optimist. And I think this is really practical to so many different people, because one of the things that I think a lot about is in sports. It's like if the team is on the sideline, like say a football game, and they're way behind, then a leader needs to kind of express both those things to their teammates, right? Like, you guys, look, I believe we can do this. I believe we can come back. We've done it before in the past. We've practiced like this during practice. It's going to be super tough. We're going to have to make sure that we at least cut the lead down to 10 points by the end of the third quarter, that sort of thing. I think it comes down to laying out almost the facts to give the other people on your team around you the true belief that you know what you're talking about when you're both optimistic and realistic.
I agree. The leader has to be honest with the team and with themselves about what's going on. If you're just all rah-rah, they might think, doesn't this guy know, we're behind 30 points? Doesn't this lady know that we just had the biggest earthquake in 81 years in Nepal and avalanches are raining down? You might question their judgment. But by being transparent and clear and honest, they go, okay, well, the leader seems to have a good judgment on this, but they make a good point. If we can get through this thing, imagine what we can get through later. And we do have a heck of a good team here and good communication skills and good climbing skills. So it's pointing out the things in their favor. And like you say, even if you say, we may not catch these guys, but man, if we can, imagine if we can beat this other team in the fourth quarter, we can do anything, So it's kind of like getting the most out of the experience, even if you don't beat the other team, even if you don't make the summit. It's about getting the most out of the experience you can to build you up for the next opportunity, the next challenge down the road.
Yeah. And, when you're hiking, you've got a lot of people that you're communicating with over your journey, and all of us on a daily basis have other teams that we're working with, relationships that we have, and tons of people that we're communicating with at all times. And you just talked about transparency. What is maybe the biggest lesson that you learned in communication through all of your ventures and your journeys and your hikes and stuff?
I think the biggest lesson I learned about communication is you have to care so much about the team's safety and success that you're willing to be an open book. Like if you and I go running, your running speed, 5-minute miles, my goodness, I can barely do, my best is like twice that speed, right? If you said, Jim, we're gonna run this race and we're gonna run 5.5-minute miles, I'd be like, Nick, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm gonna let you down later if I lie to you, if we're doing some kind of relay race. I say, Nick, if you expect me to run 5-minute miles, that's not going to happen. If we can somehow work it out that my 9-minute mile pace can combine with yours and we can make this work, that's fine. But I've got to care so much about our success as a running team or in the mountains, our safety as well, that you're just absolutely transparent. That shows that you care about your partners and the outcome, even just to admit your weaknesses right up front. And then the team can kind of, calibrate. It's like, okay, maybe Nick's going to carry more weight and he can run 7 minutes, 7-minute miles with the weight. Maybe Jim can run faster, something like that, so that we can work as a team. But I've got to be clear with myself and clear with you so that we can have our best chance of success together.
Yeah. And I don't know if I had this thought simply because you used the running analogy and I talked about running before, but the first thing that you said, or the first thing I thought about when you just said that is when I'm coaching fitness classes and people are running on the treadmill, I can't give them a unrealistic goal of like, you need to be running at this speed right now, or you need to be able to up your speed now, and things like that, when it's just not viable whatsoever. They're going to lose trust in me. They're going to lose faith in me. So I think there is 100% something to that, to caring for their well-being, caring for their safety, and being realistic about what you think the other person is capable of when you're communicating with them.
Yeah, if we were running a time mile on the treadmill and I'm running 9-minute miles, if you say, Jim, I want you to run a 5-minute mile next week, I might dismiss you. I'd say, he doesn't know me. He doesn't understand where I'm coming from. I'm 58 years old. I've never been a fast runner. Magic's not going to happen next week. But instead, if you recognize my strengths and weaknesses and say something like, Jim, you're doing a great job, but I think you can do more. And let's both talk about the things you've done in the past, what you're capable of. Let's work on a plan to get you faster. I'd be like, okay, there's a guy that he's empathetic towards me, but he sees something more in me than I do. I wonder what it is he sees. He's a qualified trainer. He's a great runner. Maybe I should just follow this guy's advice and I can become something more. That's going to be exciting to me, and I'm going to want to be part of your team. So, by being realistic but optimistic, that can spark me really to try and believe more of myself and then follow you, hopefully, to a better place.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a big trust builder with whoever it is that you're communicating with. I think that was key. So, one of the things that is kind of unique a little bit with your goal is that there's so much that's out of your control when it comes to hiking, when it comes to the weather and everything like that. For me, in my 1 mile goal, again, just to stay on that analogy, it's most things were kind of in my control. It was like I can run on the treadmill, I can run on the track, I can run outside, I can make sure I schedule out the days that it's not going to be bad weather and run then. And I kind of knew that if I put in the appropriate work, then hopefully I was going to achieve my goal, or come pretty darn close to achieving it. But you can work for years and years and years for achieving your goal, and then something completely out of your control, like earthquakes, can stop you from being able to achieve that. So when you work so hard and then something uncontrollable prevents you from maybe fulfilling that ultimate goal, how do you handle that? How do you handle the uncontrollable?
Well, I think part of it is what we talked about before, which is realizing that what you're learning along the way, whether you tick that box at the end of finishing the marathon or reaching the summit of the mountain, that's not so important. All the things you learned along the way. And I also think that when you tackle a big goal, playing at Carnegie Hall, running a huge business, climbing Mount Everest, you need a broad base of experience. And to me, that meant learning literally dozens of skills: rock climbing skills, weather prediction, avalanche avoidance, all that kind of stuff, first aid, rescue skills, being a good team member, being a good leader when the time comes. By building all those up on other expeditions and other climbs, that when something unexpected happens, like when we were on 2015, we knew we had a lot of unexpecteds to try and climb Everest, but suddenly there's an earthquake, 7.8 magnitude, that stopped our climb right in its tracks. I was able to look back at past experiences when I was in tough spots, like as you described in the book, The Ledge, when I was down inside that crevasse with my partner Mike, when I was on a rescue on Denali that I described in this book, The Next Everest. We were going for the summit and got totally stopped because we got involved in rescuing somebody else from another party. But all those things where things went off track taught me something that I can apply here. So the idea is you're slowly expanding your comfort range. And by the time I got to Everest with 33 years of experience in the mountains beneath my belt, although I didn't anticipate the earthquake and I didn't have the answer, I had been in other unusual and difficult circumstances before. And I thought, well, this is kind of like the Denali rescue where we had to do this. And it's kind of like the crevasse story where we had to do that. So by gluing pieces of experience together, even though an earthquake was not on my radar or anyone else's, we could kind of look back on our prior experiences and pull from it what we needed to deal with this challenge right here as it confronted us.
Confidence that you're going to control, you're going to be able to control what you can, and hopefully that's enough based off of all your past experiences. That's cool. That's cool. One of the things that I almost found fascinating, or seemed like it would be almost frustrating climbing Mount Everest, is how much work you have to do to acclimate yourself for the actual climb, right? Like, because the trip itself, I forget exactly how long it is, but it's I feel like at least a month, because you got to get to base camp, then you got to go to camp 1, like back down, camp 2 back down, camp 3 back down, and instead of just being able to, like, I feel like when you're at camp 3, you're just like, I'm so close, I just want to go all the way. So kind of what I'm getting at is I want you to talk to the importance of almost, because I kind of see these as stacking small wins on top of each other and kind of gaining confidence that you have the ability to make it all the way when you finally go for that final attempt. And to go back to the mile thing, I would run 800 meter runs, 1200 meter runs before actually going for that full 1600 meter, to kind of stack small wins to build up my confidence before that final attempt. So kind of talk about the importance of that, of stacking the small wins before you actually go for the final attempt, before you actually go for the goal achievement itself.
No, your insight is dead on, which is people think, oh, you just go to the base of Mount Everest, and if you're really strong, you can get it done fast. My trip was 66 days. Of those 66 days, I was probably only climbing 20 or 25 of them. The summit push was from bottom to the top was really 5-day period going out, 4 days of climbing. And the summit push on the final night was like about 8 hours. So I literally spent 3 decades getting myself ready mentally and physically, a year of super hard training at age 54, and then 66 days on the mountain just to be ready for that last 8-hour push to the summit. And part of the reason we need to go up and down the mountain, like you said, is the air gets thinner and thinner the higher we go. So I don't care if you could take the fittest Olympian in the world in any sport, put them at the base of Mount Everest and say climb it, they cannot climb it in one push. Period. Their body's not ready. They haven't grown enough red blood cells. So like you described, we have to go up and down the mountain for weeks and weeks and weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks of going up and down to learn the route, to make our body get stressed under lack of oxygen, to grow more red blood cells, and those extra red blood cells will help us on the next trip. And you can see that this, we call it acclimatization, or when we go up and down the mountain, we call it rotations. And we do 3 or 4 of these rotations. But each time we go up, we're a little bit faster and it's a little bit easier. And so by the time you've done your 4th rotation as you're heading for the summit, our times are down by 40%, 50% of what they were that first trip. So it's also a psychological boost, which is, wow, 6 weeks ago, it was so hard to get to Camp 1. Now I cruised past Camp 1 in like 4 hours and didn't even really feel the need for a break. Wow, I guess I really am ready. So you're boosting your mental resilience and your confidence as well. And that's necessary because on the final summit push, that last night, I think it was day 60 or 61 for me, on that last night, you are at the very limit of human capability, and there's no more gear that we can carry. There's no more things we can eat or drink. In fact, your body really can't eat or drink at that high altitude. We didn't even get any sleep before our summit push. So it's all internal reserves. It's all confidence. It's all teamwork. That's what gets you to the summit. And so you're almost sort of toughening yourself up for that big, hard summit push ahead. So all those rounds and all that stacking is not fun and easy, but it builds you up, and that's what's critical to when you get to the point where it's not even physical anymore, it's pure mental. Can I stay awake for 36 hours and do 24 hours of exercise in that time period? Because that's what I had to do on that last summit day. I was literally on my feet for 36 hours and doing exercise like 24 or 27 of them, which was mind-boggling to me. But at that point, I was ready because of everything we'd put in.
Yeah. And, I asked the question in regards to the mental confidence and the mental belief in yourself. And obviously that is a huge, huge component of it, as you just kind of stressed at the end. But there's legitimately a human capability principle to that as well. Like you said, you can't just put anybody the fittest person in the world at the base camp, and they would not be able to get there simply because their body has not been acclimated to it. Their red blood cells would not be prepared for that. And that's like a human growth or a personal growth principle where like you can't go from A to Z immediately because your body won't be ready. Your knowledge is not there yet. Your skills are not there yet. Your experience is not there yet. And that's kind of one of the things that has kept me patient in my own personal growth journey and my own business growth journey, because it's like, I know if I went A to Z right now, and if I made $1 million tomorrow, I wouldn't have built up the systems, the processes, the skills, the experience, the knowledge to be able to sustain that. Like it would crumble probably, right? Because I wouldn't know how to handle it. And I feel like that, a lot of people see that when people win the lottery, they'll blow it all away because they haven't put in the reps and they don't have the legitimate knowledge and skills to be able to sustain that level that they're at. So I really feel like there's a human capability principle there that we have to be the person who has the ability to achieve that overall goal.
Absolutely. I mean, even on the physical side, you talked about stacking earlier, and I talked about that in my book, The Next Everest, that I got in really good shape for 2015 when I went to go climb the mountain. Then the earthquake happened and it stopped it short. But I came home and I asked myself, what were my weaknesses? What do I have to do better so the next time I go back, when I'm going to be 2 years older, that I can handle it? And so I did all the training I'd done before, but more intensely, but I added other components. In my training, I did stacking days where I realized maybe at home I'll have a big climb coming up, a 12 or 16-hour climb. Well, I'll tend to take the day off before that big climb and then probably the one after that to rest. And I go, wait a minute, that's not how the mountain works. We have 3, 4, 5 days in a row of tough work. I have to put that into my training. So I did stacking days where I'd do a moderate day, a hard day, another hard day, and another moderate day to teach my body to respond when it was tired. That increased my chances of success, but also my chances of safety, which is when I'm coming down from the summit push on day 6 or day 7 and I'm completely depleted, can I keep going? I mean, that's a critical safety factor. And a measure of that is that, I lost the most weight I was really lean for myself at age 54. But when I went to the mountain, while I was on the mountain in 2017, I lost 22 pounds. And when I came home, did some more fat tests, and I had lost 2 pounds of fat and 20 pounds of muscle. Because there's just not enough food and enough protein up there. I lost 20 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks. Wow. And so I kind of knew that was going to happen from other expeditions that I'd done. So I would practice that at home doing what I called deprivation days, which is I'd pick the coldest nights in the winter and I would roll out of bed at 2 in the morning, the coldest hour of the coldest nights, and I would drink no water, no food, and go to my local peak that I knew well for safety margins. I didn't go wandering off a new place. And I knew I could crawl back down if I had to. And I would climb the peak in the dark, in the coldest time, no food, no water. And that taught me that I can get up in the middle of the night, and a little bit deprived already, and go put in 6 hours of hard exercise with literally no sustenance. And that gave me confidence on summit night that although I wish I had more food and more water, we don't. But I've been through this before, so I'm just going to go without it. And that really boosts your confidence as well.
Wow, that's insane. I don't think you said this in the book, but did you have like a specific fitness coach or anything that was kind of giving programming or helping you out there, or were you just kind of basing off of your past experience?
I drew from all those sources. For 2015, I had a trainer that I work with here at my main workout facility where I've been going for 29 years, the Raintree Athletic Club. And I also studied some great books, training for the new Alpinism. But I also had my own program because I'd been, doing this for, 33, 34 years. So I kind of combined the best elements of those. But I recognized what I didn't know. And so I studied physiology really hard, and I got, lactate threshold tests and all that stuff, and had that inform my training. So it was kind of a blend of all of those. But if you haven't been through a lot of those prior expeditions, I would definitely recommend working with a really good trainer, because it's not only, as you know very well, it's not only getting stronger, it's also nutrition, it's recovery, it's rest, because you don't want to arrive at the mountain exhausted. You don't want to arrive at the start line of that mile or marathon completely worn out with an injury, because that's not going to work well. So it's balancing all those, and it takes a long time to learn that about yourself. So I say work with a coach until you know that well about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just curious if you experienced this at all, because I know I've experienced it in the past with fitness goals, and a couple of people that I've interviewed have experienced this as well. Is sometimes if maybe you don't have a coach or you don't have anybody necessarily monitoring your training, sometimes ambitious people who work really hard will think they need to do more than they necessarily kind of maybe actually do, and they might push themselves too hard to the point of injury, to the point of excess fatigue and that sort of thing. Did you ever have that kind of mental battle or discussion with yourself of, am I pushing myself too hard, and maybe I need to actually hold myself back a little bit, or did you ever have that kind of conversation with yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I had some good climbing partners I've been climbing with for 20 years, and they know me well from being in the mountains together, and we've trained together. So they kind of acted as an outside monitor for me. They could sort of comment about my speed or how I even looked that day. Do my eyes look good and bright and cheery, or am I all, almost hung over with exhaustion from yesterday's workout? So they acted as a reality check on me. And I'm a numbers guy too. I'm a geologist by training. So I get big spreadsheets of my training stuff. And I look back at my old training logs as well to see how I was doing. And even though I was older, I was actually doing some standard training runs and doing some winter 14,000 footers. I was doing about 10 or 15% faster than I had done in prior years, which I took as a good sign. But also I started monitoring days when I was fatigued. So yeah, you got to really watch out for fatigue and injury prevention. And that's hard for gung-ho people that want to perform more. We think more is better. Yes, but recovery is necessary too. So kind of a combination through my own records and my training partners. Somebody holding you back a little bit to make sure that you don't hurt yourself is a key part of being ready for race day, for summit day.
Yeah, no doubt. Because I definitely have found that if you don't have somebody monitoring you to a certain extent, and you're not super clear on what the appropriate limits are, sometimes you can over push yourself if you're overly ambitious. But one of the next things that I found super fascinating and really relatable to people is, after the entire time you were climbing, you're probably pretty damn uncomfortable. But after you climbed and summited, you had essentially achieved the goal, but you still got to get back down, right? And there's a lot of there's still possibilities for slip ups and stuff on the way back down, obviously. And so one of the things that you talked about was how you're like, okay, I got to stay focused. Just because you got there doesn't mean you can let up quite yet. You have to stay focused. And I think all of us experience that on a daily basis, whether we're working out and maybe we're 45 minutes into the workout and we have another 5-10 minutes to go. We can't get complacent with the work that we've put in. We have to make sure we stay focused and keep our good form and keep pushing ourselves. Or maybe we've had an awesome day at work, but it's 4:00 and we still have another hour and we really got to push through and we got to stay focused, even though we're uncomfortable, we're tired and all that sort of thing. So what allowed you to stay focused and allowed you to execute at a high level even when you were tired and uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think some of that was prior experience, good experiences, knowing that it's going to be difficult when I'm fatigued. I've been up for 34 hours or something. My body's depleted, all those kind of things. So I was able to anticipate that coming up, to know that I've been through it before, but also realizing the stakes too. That, my family was behind me for sure, but worried about my safety. My climbing partners that had helped me out so much to get ready for that, and I just didn't want to blow it, towards the very end and trip and have an accident or something like that. So I felt like, the closer I got to being back to base camp, back to safety, that the stakes were going up because I was getting more exhausted mentally and physically. There's more potential for a slip up. So it's kind of like it's all riding on finishing well with good form, right to the final move, right to the finish line. And I'd done a little martial arts, and my martial arts teacher told me, you don't try and punch the target, you try and punch through the target. My uncle was a marathon runner, and he said, don't run to the finish line, run past the finish line. Just another way of maintain your good form all the way. And when I teach ice climbing to college students, same thing. I say, you may climb the difficult part and you can get a little complacent, but if you're not clipped into those anchors safely at the top, you are at a growing risk of a problem if you slip, because your protection is far below you. So good form all the way to the anchors. And that would be, in this case, good form all the way to base camp. Because, all that work's going to be for naught if something goes wrong towards the end.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Before I ask the next question, remind me, what's your daughter's name? Jess. Okay, because I'm bringing up when you guys had to wait so long to make the actual summit attempt. You were reading the letters that your family brought you, and you were reading the letter that your daughter brought you, and it really brought you a lot of emotion. A lot of emotions came up from that. And one of the things that you wrote down in the book, and that you realized at the time, was that patience is perseverance. It's passive perseverance, because a lot of us go-getters or ambitious people, when things get tough, we think we got to push harder. We got to push harder. We got to go. Despite the weather being crappy, we're going to push through it, right? But sometimes patience is actually the real perseverance. And I truly believe that one of the separators that is going to allow people to be successful nowadays is being able to embrace delayed gratification, because I think that is required for almost achieving goals. So I kind of want you to just riff on that quote a little bit, and riff on how important that was to you at the time, and riff on how important it is for other people to realize that patience is true perseverance.
Yeah, like you and maybe many of your listeners, I'm a go guy. High energy, do more, go faster, get a lot in your day, and that gets a lot of things done. But it doesn't work 100% of the time. And in this case that you're describing, it was my second trip to Everest in 2017. Hadn't summited yet. We'd gone up to camps 1, 2, and 3 on all our rotations. It's like day 55. We're finally ready to make our final summit attempt, but the weather went bad. And I thought, well, that's fine. We'll have a few days of bad weather while we rest. We need 3 or 4 days of rest. Well, the weather went bad for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 9 days, 10 days. 10 miserable days of sleeping on the ice, cold. I've lost 20 pounds. I'm just completely emaciated compared to this fit person that left home 6 weeks earlier. And I felt ready to give up. And you're right. That's when I pulled out one of my secret weapons, one of those letters from my family. And my daughter said, I'm sure you've suffered, and there's more suffering to come. But if you can get through that, you'll get the chance to try for the top. And I'd seen this in small pieces before. When there was a storm on the mountain, I used to say to the students, all storms end, and this one will too. I don't know if it's 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, but every storm ends, and this will too. So let's not be stupid and march out into the storm just to prove that we're tough and go-getters. We're going to stay here. We're going to hunker down and be smart. We're going to have good nutrition, good food and water. We're going to get our equipment ready. And when the storm clears and it's ready to go, we'll go back out. But it was tough for me on day 10 and 11 to keep hanging in there. But I realized in this case, being perseverant was not doing more or faster or harder or longer. It was that patience. And in this case, patience is perseverance. It's passive perseverance. If we wait until the weather clears, we'll get our chance. And that can be really hard, but it's crucial sometimes. And I started writing the book, The Next Everest, years ago, but it came to be true this last year with the pandemic. I mean, you can't force the virus to go away. You can't force society to get better. You can't force the medical society to come up with a vaccine quicker. we had to hunker down and wait. And now we're lucky enough to have the vaccine and know how to manage ourselves with social distancing. Now we can get back to work and fun. But when it was bad, we had to hunker down. And sometimes that really takes self-control, and it takes leadership, and it takes confidence in oneself that this is difficult, but if I wait long enough and just don't let my guard down, I'll do everything I can while I'm locked in my house or stuffed in the tent, but soon the conditions will improve and I'll be ready to go again. I think sometimes that's the greatest wisdom of all for reaching our long-term goals.
Yeah, I think like you said, you do everything you can, and you don't necessarily force something stupid that could put you even further back. Because I think a lot of times if you have business goals and you want to get to a certain point, or if you have professional goals and you want to get promoted, if you feel like you're doing everything kind of that you can already, but you still haven't seen that promotion come, or you still haven't seen that business goal hit, sometimes you might force something that could hurt your reputation, or that was just the wrong way. It's not the path that you should have gone down. Sometimes you just have to be patient and realize it, and you trust the process and trust that what you're doing is going to ultimately lead you there at some point. And so don't force something that might end up actually setting you back further.
Right. And you gave some good examples. It's not just a matter of getting hurt by overtraining or getting lost in the storm on a mountain. It's if you're overdriven for that business success, you might make a decision where you take advantage of somebody or do something without integrity, right, or do something to harm your reputation or your company's reputation or get sued. Those aren't worth it. Those were all bad decisions. If you pressured yourself too much to hit that sales goal for the year, that you cheated on a deal or ripped off one of your partners, those things are unacceptable. And so those things are unacceptable. And so you need to make sure that you don't cross that line and harm yourself or those around you just because you're driven towards the goal. Maybe it's better to wait and try and reach that next year or 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I was really fascinated about in regards to like kind of a personal question towards you is you've been able to stay married with your wife, Gloria, for all this time, and she's been able to allow you to go on these expeditions that are dangerous and have a lot of uncertainty. What are like 2 keys to y'all's relationship that has allowed it to continue to flourish and be good throughout all these different expeditions and throughout the difficult conversations that you have to bring up? Like, I want to do this thing. Like, what are a couple keys that have allowed you to continue to have a good relationship through this?
Yeah, thanks. We've been married over 31 years. We got 2 grown children, and it hasn't always been easy. There's challenges in life, and when one of the spouses is a high altitude climber, it brings in more challenges as well. I think a big thing is taking turns supporting each other. And so like maybe I'm getting ready for Everest, and Gloria knows that this year I'm going to be spending a lot of time training and studying details about the mountain and getting my equipment ready. And so this year may be a little bit more about me, and that might not be fair to her this year, but hopefully next year when she's trying to get that promotion at work or getting her next nursing degree, she's an RN and she's been working in the COVID unit, then it's going to be my turn to support her. And I think we kind of give and take like that over the long term. And I think that's one crucial thing. And the other thing is realizing that as life partners or in other relationships, climbing partners, business partners, we're really trying to help each other make each other's dreams come true and do it in a good, way with transparency and integrity and pride. And so sometimes I'm going to help my friends and sometimes they're going to help me. Again, it's that taking turns. If it's always about me, then my wife and friends might not be here in 10 years, and I don't blame them. So we've got to be willing to take turns in climbing. When there's 2 people on a rope, one person leads first and they put in the equipment and the other person follows. And when the leader is taking the risk and doing the hard work, the follower or the belayer who's belaying and holding their rope, their job is totally to support that leader, whatever that means. If it means standing in the rain or shouting instructions or taking 4 hours until that person finishes leading the pitch, that's what the belayer and the follower do. But later on, we switch it around. And so we take turns completely supporting one another when the risk is high and the rewards are potentially high. I think that's the biggest thing to a successful long-term climbing partnership, business partnership, life partnership.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Second to last question here, Jim. One of the things that I think a lot of people asked you that you wrote down towards the end of the book is when, after you came back, everybody's like, what's next? What's the next big goal? What are you doing? What are you doing next? And so I'm not necessarily going to ask you that specifically, and I don't know if you've come up with something since then that is kind of like your next goal, if you will, but how are you going to go about deciding what is next? Either maybe you already have, and if you have decided it, how did you come up with that as the next goal? Or if you haven't yet, what are kind of the criteria that you're using to come up with that worthwhile goal for yourself?
Yeah, even as I was descending Everest, we were about 3 hours from base camp, and I knew we were going to be finished real soon. I kind of thought about that. It's like, wow, I've been dreaming of climbing this mountain for over 40 years, literally been training and working towards it, for 34 years, and I finally made it. I asked myself a little bit then, what's next? And I thought, I'll think about it later. But it unfolded slowly when I came back. As I described in the book, someone said to me, well, you can't climb a bigger mountain than Everest, so what, you're going to quit climbing? You're all done? I'm like, no, there's always going to be another challenge, another opportunity. It just might not be a mountain that has a greater elevation than Everest, but there'll always be a Next Everest. And that's where the title came from. And I realized that one of the things I wanted to do, because I was, my mid 50s, is to try and help young people and other people around me reach their goals. So that means, supporting my wife and her goals, supporting my kids, but also people who are kind of in my orbit. When young climbers want to go on an expedition, 2019, my partner Rodney and I took some young climbers down to teach them how to do the expedition game because, maybe now I'm getting to be 58, maybe I'm past my prime, but I can pass on what I learned and make opportunities happen for others. I've loaned some equipment to two young climbers that are up in Alaska right now because you know what? That's not, that piece of equipment doesn't do any good sitting in my basement. Let's give it to the young guys and let them use it to try and make their dreams come true. So I'm kind of using that opportunity to look for places to try and support others. And part of my Next Everest is to share what I've learned. And so that's why I spent so much time these last couple of years writing and polishing this book, The Next Everest. And I continue my public speaking for universities and associations and corporations to try and share what I learned at the outer perimeters of this adventurous life that'll hopefully help people get ready for their next challenge, their next Everest.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. I like that. Well, before I ask the last question, Jim, I just want to acknowledge you for the resilience that you've had. I mean, so many times, like I did a 1 mile goal and I trained for 10 weeks. You trained for 30 years for Everest. And so the more I get older, the more I realize how special and unique it is when somebody kind of stays so focused on kind of one goal or one message or kind of one idea, and their ability to stay so consistent with that over a long period of time. I think that is so rare that people are able to keep that kind of level of focus on one idea or one topic or kind of one goal. And I think that's what you've been able to do for 3+ decades, and now for you to give it back, that's just the ultimate gift that you can give to people.
Well, thanks. And as I described in the book, when I got to the summit of Everest, there was no conquering any mountain. Nobody conquers any mountain. I'm just a little flea on the mountain's back. But I felt really humbled and really grateful for all the people that have helped me along the way. My climbing partners, my friends, my parents when I was young, my wife and children now. I almost feel like the whole team worked. If it was football, we'd say everybody worked really hard to get the ball down to the 99-yard line. And all I had to do was run it in that last yard. And that was both a source of strength for me and a security that I've got so many people behind me. I'm going to try and get this done and then get back home to them and help them with their goals. And that's the thing. I think that's what I learned by surviving the earthquake and by summiting Everest is we just take turns uplifting each other through the good times and through the bad times. That's how we get through earthquakes. That's how we get through pandemics. Surge to the front and help when you can, uplift others, and that's really what it's about in the long run is try and go as far as you can and help others go as far as they can in their journey.
Well, I acknowledge your humility as well. Well, I want to make sure everybody goes and supports you. As you guys, I've already probably heard you're probably going to want to go get this book after having heard this, but it is such I feel like you really dive into the book. You do such a good job of graphically describing the book and really making the reader feel like they are there with you and able to see what is going on around you. And I think that's one of the coolest things because when you feel like you're there, that's when my heart rate would get elevated. That's when I'm like reading sentences super fast and flipping the pages super fast. And that's what I love so much about this book. So you guys go get The Next Everest by Jim Davidson. You can follow Jim on Facebook and on Instagram at Resilience with Climber Jim. You can follow him on Twitter at Climber Jim there. And you can go learn more at speakingofadventure.com. Is there any other place that people could go learn more and support you in your work?
Those are the best places. The website mentioned, speakingofadventure.com, and the social media, because it's just great to be able to talk to people like you and put messages out that hopefully can be of some value to somebody else. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you and your listeners.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad we got to run it back and make it happen again. Well, Jim, the last question, and I asked you this before, so I'm interested to see what you come up with this time. But I think that getting closer to the best version of yourself is both a constant journey. I don't think we're ever at that best version, but I also believe it's a unique journey. I believe that the way that I'm going to get closer to the best version of myself is going to be a little bit different than the way that you get closer to the best version of yourself. So for you personally, if there are 3 things that you could currently do or currently work on to get closer to that best Jim Davidson that you could possibly be, then what are those 3 things that you could currently do or currently work on?
One would be listen carefully to others and look for opportunities to help them out, which is something I said was sort of part of my Next Everest, to literally seek those out. And when I think I can help out, put my shoulder behind somebody. The other is to try and keep sharing the lessons that I have learned. I've been very fortunate and privileged to get this far, both in life and in business and climbing. So to appreciate that and try and share the lessons through the speaking and the writing I do to hopefully inspire somebody else up against their challenge. And also, as I get older and a little slower, is to try and age gracefully. People say, "Well, will you quit climbing now?" No, I'm a climber and a runner. I'll keep doing that until I can't even climb up the stairs anymore. But if I get to that point when I'm 88 years old, I can barely climb stairs, I hope I still try and do it with a little bit of grace and as best I can, even though it'll be incredibly slow and a very minor performance for me to climb up that tiny little hill. Hopefully, I'll do it with a little bit of grace and as best I can, just to honor the gifts I've been given.
Awesome. Well, 3 great things. It was an honor and a thrill having you back on, Jim. Awesome stuff today. Appreciate it.
Great being with you, and thanks for giving me the chance to talk to you and your listeners.
Yeah, of course.